People are getting cancer in their 20s and 30s now. A massive increase in the rates of cancer, and it's happening in younger and younger decades. So younger and younger people are getting more and more aggressive cancers. That's clearly not genetic. They threw away hundreds of high-quality studies. So this is academic malfeasance.
Come with me while I ask Anthony Chaffee 9 of my most frequently asked carnivore diet questions. Do carnivores need fiber?
Well, no one needs fiber, really. It's non-digestible. We can't break it down. We can't absorb it. We don't get any nutrients from it. But it's termed an essential nutrient, which is funny because you don't actually get any nutrition from it. So how can it be an essential nutrient if it's not a nutrient in the first place? The reason we were told that we should eat fiber was from Dr. Burkitt, who was a very famous doctor, and he was working in Africa, and he saw that people had larger poops, and he thought that was because they were eating a lot more fiber. And he also noticed that they had lower rates of bowel cancer. So he said, it must be the fiber. They eat more fiber, they have less bowel cancer, therefore fiber causes, helps against bowel cancer. That's where that came from. There was no experimental data. There were no even surveys or epidemiological studies. It was a guess by this very famous doctor who, because he was famous, it ended up taking a life of its own. And now we're teaching that to people that no, this reduces your risk of bowel cancer. There's actually zero evidence for that. Zero hard experimental evidence. There are poor studies, mostly epidemiological, that says, well, if you eat more fiber and you eat more fruits and vegetables, that this can be better for a number of different reasons, but they have a lot of confounding factors. You're talking about people that are eating more a whole food diet versus a junk food diet that doesn't have fiber versus a whole food meat-based diet that doesn't have fiber. And so they're not actually asking that question. There are plenty of civilizations like the Maasai, like the Inuit, and many others that are extremely healthy and don't have much or any fiber in their diet. So we know we don't actually need it. And then there are some experimental trials where they would give someone a fiber tablet or something like that and say, okay, well, what does this do for you? And they find that, it actually lowers your blood pressure. But these are people that are eating, again, a standard processed food garbage diet. Then they're adding in a bit of fiber. And then the conclusion is that, eating fiber improves health. But how much did it improve health? A lot of these studies actually only dropped their blood pressure by 1.5 points in their systolic blood pressure, which is the top number on their blood pressure. So if you have someone who has a systolic blood pressure of 170 and that drops down to 168.5, like you really haven't done much good for them. They still has a very serious elevation to their blood pressure and they need to be put on medication. So it's not like fiber is a substitute for these medications in those circumstances. So it's a bit of a con. And then they make meta-analyses of these things and say, look at this, meta-analysis showed that fiber is so much better, but how much did it improve by, and what were the quality of the studies? There's a saying in statistics where you take a lot of different studies and you make a meta-analysis of it, which is a big group of studies, and you say, this is such great information. But there's a term that they use which is called garbage in, garbage out. If you have a lot of garbage studies in your meta-analysis or your systematic review, you're going to get a garbage result. And that's the case with fiber. So no, you really don't need fiber. And how would fiber help in the first place? Well, it binds to bile and removes bile from your body, which actually you want bile. And it also blocks out the absorption of a lot of nutrients and sometimes things that maybe aren't so good for you, and such as sugars and carbohydrates and things like that. So it can stop you from absorbing up to 30% of the food that you eat. And so if you're eating hot garbage, then getting 30% less of that probably is a good thing. But if you're not eating hot garbage and you're actually eating a good healthy diet, then you don't want to limit the absorption of the food that you're eating. And so no, you would not want fiber. The other argument is that you don't want the fiber, but your microbiome wants the fiber. That's actually not true either. You have microbacteria in your colon Some of it can eat some of the fiber, and it produces saturated fat called short-chain fatty acids. Say, well, these are really good for your enterocytes and the cells in your intestines. But if you're in a ketogenic diet and you're eating fat and meat, you have an abundance of these circulating saturated fats and short-chain fatty acids and ketone bodies that actually feed your intestines, and so you actually don't need that. And also they say, well, you need it for a diverse gut bacteria so you can have a good, healthy microbiome. And again, that actually hasn't been proven. That's only compared to people eating a processed food diet, not people eating a whole food meat-based diet. When you look at people eating a meat-based diet like the Inuit and so on, they actually have extremely healthy microbiomes, and more people are coming to a carnivore diet, even from a clean keto diet that has fiber and whole plants, and they're improving their microbiome as well. So basically on every single way that you look at it, on a carnivore diet, you don't need or want fiber.
Will I get colon cancer?
Meat is definitely not going to cause colon cancer or any other form of cancer. There has never been a high-level study showing a connection, a causative connection between cancer of any form and any meat consumption, even processed meats. So this comes from a misconception brought about by the WHO in 2015, I believe. They basically made this proclamation saying that eating meat, especially processed meat, was now considered to be carcinogenic, and that eating red meat, unprocessed red meat, was a likely carcinogen, so it was a class 2 carcinogen. And so this put processed meat up in the same category as cigarettes and plutonium and radiation exposure. However, the relative risk ratios for that were massively different. They have these numbers ascribed to them, and who knows what they mean, but the number next to processed meat was like a 6, next to cigarettes was 318,000, and plutonium was something like 6 million. So yes, it's in the same category. It's not nearly, it's not close to the same thing, but also it was put there a bit fraudulently because they had hundreds of studies with which to choose from, and they eliminated out a lot of good quality studies that showed absolutely no connection between meat, and particularly unprocessed red meat, and cancer of any form, in favor of about 30 very poor quality garbage studies, which have been since called junk studies and lazy science by the University of Washington in Seattle, who did a large systematic review, meta-analysis of the available information, and it looked over 800 studies and found that this was completely unfounded, their conclusion. And so they took those studies that had very, very low correlation. It was only an 18% increase correlation with processed meat and colon cancer in this instance. But in these epidemiological studies with surveys and studies that don't eliminate confounding factors are complicating factors that could change the outcome. So things like smoking, they didn't correct for smoking. So people that were eating meat in these studies were more likely to smoke, they're more likely to drink, they're more likely to do other sorts of things. It's called healthy user bias. People that do things that are thought to be healthy, they're more likely to do other things that are thought to be healthy, and vice versa. If they sort of, well, I don't care, I like eating meat and I like smoking, I like drinking, so I'm just going to do it, they're going to do other things as well that aren't as healthy. So they didn't correct for those things, or they didn't account for those things anyway. And so they got different results than these other studies that did account for those things. Also, they considered foods that had ingredients as meat as just blanket meat. So fast food, just because there's a meat patty in there, they considered the burger and the fries and the sugary drink, that was all meat. And pizza was meat because they might have meat on the toppings. And so if you ate fast food, if you ate pizza, they said, okay, well, that's meat, you're eating meat. And these people ate less pizza and less fast food, oh, they eat less meat. And that's a bit of a nonsense too. One of the panel members on the WHO panel that came up with that decision actually fought against this decision very, very vehemently. And he pointed out to the people that eventually overruled him that they were all vegans, vegetarians, and Seventh-day Adventists who have a religious bent on vegetarianism and are anti-meat. And he said, you need to declare your biases. You need to say that this is where you're coming from, and they refused. And he went on to say that that was the most difficult thing he's ever had to go through in his professional career, because they threw away hundreds of high quality studies in favor of these very poor quality studies that gave them the result that they wanted. So this is academic malfeasance. And so the University of Washington just published a couple of years ago, like I said, a massive literature review actually looking at all the available studies, and found that no, there's absolutely no connection between even processed meat and cancer of any form or any health issue of any type, and especially not unprocessed red meat. And so no, that's not going to cause cancer. The carnivorous people around the world now, the Nanette, the Inuit, the Maasai, they don't have, when eating a natural diet, when eating their traditional diet, they don't get these cancers in any real form. In fact, polar explorer and Harvard professor of ethnology, now maybe called anthropology, Professor Vilhjalmur Stefansson, he lived with the Inuit for 12 to 15 years, learned their culture, lived with them, just ate the all-meat diet with them, especially when he was up traveling in the polar north. And he found exactly the same thing. He found in these populations they really did not get cancer, and he wrote a book called "Is Cancer a Disease of Civilization?" Answer to that is yes. It's not something that is typically found in nature or in populations that are living a more primitive lifestyle. People say, well, they're just dying too early. That's actually not true. Anthropologists have shown that these hunter-gatherer populations, even when they're not just eating meat, live as long as we do or longer in many circumstances. It's just that the average life expectancy from birth is lower because infant mortality rate is a lot higher when you're having kids out in the middle of the jungle or in the middle of the frozen tundra when there's polar bears prowling around, right? So that brings down the average. But even then, the average from birth is still around 60 for a lot of these places. Plenty of time to get cancer. People are getting cancer in their 20s and 30s now. And that's the thing, too. You don't even have to look at those populations. You look at our populations. Cancer used to be called the C word. It's something that you never want to talk about because it was so rare and it was so horrible that you didn't want to talk about it. You didn't want to bring it into your house and bring yourself bad luck. Now, 1 in 2 people will get cancer at some point in their life. That's a massive increase in the rates of cancer, and it's happening in younger and younger and younger decades. So younger and younger people are getting more and more aggressive cancers. That's clearly not genetic. That's obviously something in our environment, and it's not from eating meat, because we've always eaten meat, and we've eaten a lot more meat historically than we have certainly in the early 1900s, when we sort of ate less and less meat, and then that's when heart disease and cancer and all these things rose up, and that was at the trough of when we were eating the lowest amount of meat in 200 years. So it's not the meat. I think it's from eating all the processed junk food and garbage. And 4 out of 5 men smoked in the 1920s and before, and yet the cancer rates and lung cancer rates were lower than they were several decades later, when we knew more about smoking and actually were smoking less. So, what the hell's going on with that? It's a good question, but it's not red meat in any case.
Is high cholesterol an issue?
People want to get the long answer. They can go to my video on YouTube called The Truth About Cholesterol and Heart Disease. The long and short of it is that cholesterol was falsely vilified as the cause of heart disease. There are 0 studies showing a cause and effect relationship between cholesterol or saturated fat and cardiovascular disease. In fact, there are many studies showing an inverse correlation between saturated fat and cholesterol and heart disease. Correlation is not causation. You can't prove causation from a study that only shows correlation. And so you have to do an experimental study that can show a cause and effect relationship. And the only ones that have been done, the only ones on Earth in the history of humanity that have lowered saturated fat by replacing it with unsaturated vegetable oils, typically, and margarine, those sorts of things, and thereby lowering LDL and total cholesterol. There was only 5, really, and 3 of those showed that this didn't improve outcomes for cardiovascular health. And 2 of them, the larger and more well-designed studies, one of them being the Minnesota coronary experiment that was led by Ansel Keys, who first hypothesized, or at least popularized, the cholesterol heart hypothesis. This was the largest one with about 10,000 people, went for several years. It was very well controlled because these people were institutionalized, so they could perfectly control their meals. So they knew exactly what they were getting and they weren't cheating. They weren't able to cheat because they were institutionalized. And they found that the people in the treatment group where they lowered saturated fat and lowered cholesterol actually had more heart attacks and strokes and died more of cardiovascular disease. So this killed people. And instead of being honest about this and publishing this and going, hey, this was wrong, my theory was wrong, I take it all back, they hid it and they buried it. And it wasn't uncovered for another 40 years. And that was only because someone was looking into it and they contacted the sons, who are now doctors, of one of the original researchers along with Ansel Keys. And they asked them, hey, do you have any of your dad's old records? I'm trying to find this study that he did, but they never published the results. And they looked through their things and they found that, yes, they did have all the original data, and that's what they found. So this was published back, I think, in 2014. And this should never have been buried, and the cholesterol heart hypothesis should never have been put forward based on this study, but many other studies that were misrepresented as well. Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, published a study from the University of California in San Francisco in 2016, where they published actual internal memos by the sugar companies detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease, when it's much more likely, in fact, to be sugar. There was a lot of studies coming out saying that, hey, sugar is causing heart disease, and they wanted to cover that up and protect their assets. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat increased cholesterol, stop eating both, and it changed the world. And as a result, the rates of heart disease have actually increased, and heart attacks have increased. First-time heart attacks have increased. People are surviving them more. We've reduced smoking, and we have better interventions. And so the mortality rate in America started to come down after the 1970s. However, the rate and the incidence and prevalence has gone up. So the percentage of people who have cardiovascular disease, who have had their first heart attack, is going up. And the people that are getting new diagnoses of heart disease and heart attacks every year is going up. It's just that surviving more. So this is a classic con that people will say, well, no, the mortality rate peaked in the 60s and 70s, and then it started coming down right when we started telling people to stop eating cholesterol and taking medications. And that's not what we said. We said the rate has gone up. Just because people are surviving, because our interventions are getting better, and people are smoking less, that's a very different thing. But actually around the world, these are just US statistics, but around the world, the mortality rate is going up, and it's actually going up faster than the rate of population growth. So this was a con, and this was perpetrated by the big food companies and has been perpetuated since then by these special interests that profit from us eating their garbage and taking their medications. Even the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, the top cardiology journal in the world, published a landmark paper, systematic review of looking at randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, published this back in 2020, looking at saturated fat and its connection to cardiovascular disease. And they found that there is absolutely no association whatsoever between saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease. In fact, they found an inverse relationship between saturated fat consumption and stroke rate. So the more saturated fat people are eating, the less strokes they were having, the lower their risk of strokes. And the less saturated fat they were eating, the higher their risk of strokes. So this is a fraud and it's a con, and we need to completely rethink our entire approach to cholesterol and heart disease in particular.
Can you lose weight on the carnivore diet?
Well, if you have excess weight to lose, you can definitely lose weight. If you are underweight, though, it wouldn't cause you to lose more weight unless you're under eating. It will optimize your weight. It'll optimize your body composition as well. But it's the same thing. If you are eating a carnivore diet, you can just listen to your body's natural instincts. So just like every animal in the world, they know instinctually how much to eat and what to eat. And so when they're eating their natural diet, they're able to just eat as much as they want to. And then they say, yep, there's something in them that internally tells them when to stop. And so we have that same thing, and it goes by taste. And so if you're eating fatty meat until it stops tasting good, that's your body telling you how much you need. If you eat more than that or you eat less than that, you'll get a different result. But if you listen to your body and you know how to listen to your body, then you'll get the results you want. And so it's the same thing. So if you're trying to lose excess fat, you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. You try to get 1 to 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein, and that's usually the right range for people. And you just do that once or twice a day, however many times is right for you, and your body will perfectly track how much energy is coming in so that you lose weight steadily down and get down to a healthy, stable body fat percentage. And so a lot of people are coming to this for weight loss. It can take a little longer for some people if they have a slowed metabolism. That can take a few months before their metabolism gets going, which can be frustrating because the majority of people lose weight very quickly on a carnivore diet, but everyone's starting at a different place, and so we just need to be patient and just give it time. And then people that are trying to put on weight, maybe they've been under eating for a long time. It's the same thing. You eat fatty meat till it stops tasting good in those ratios as many times a day as you need to, and you'll put on healthy, lean body mass, muscle and bone, and collagen deposition as well, in the right proportions and ways that your body wants you to. So your body will perfectly track this. So yes, you can absolutely lose weight. And most people do very early on. Some people take a bit longer if they have a depressed metabolism, but it will happen that way for everybody eventually, as long as they're eating enough and eating the right things and have really eliminated out everything except fatty meat and water. There are a lot of people in the keto community that have lost a lot of weight going on a ketogenic diet. Then they have the keto snacks and the keto treats, and it's just these, erythritol, a monk fruit sugar, and stevia. Well, that's not carbs, and so it's fine, and they actually put on weight. And that can have hormonal disruption and other sorts of effects on your body that make you put on weight. So, and dairy is a classic way that people stall their weight loss or even put on weight. So, unwanted weight. And so what you want to do is you want to try to stick to just clean, whole meats, plenty of fat, plenty of water, and nothing else.
What kind of meats can carnivores eat?
So, list them out. You can eat cow, horse, sheep, lamb, chicken, duck, pigeon. Just teasing. Anyway, so you can eat any meat that you like, that makes you feel good, that you enjoy, that you can afford, that you have access to. So that's going to be different in different areas. Any animal, basically, as long as you're not eating a poison sac or a part of it, something that's venomous. Any meat that we would traditionally eat in certain areas, you can just eat that meat. So seafood is fine as well, unless someone has like a seafood allergy, just a shellfish, etc. Those things are fine. And so it's really just that. It's just whatever animal meat that you enjoy, that you have access to, that you can afford, and that makes you feel the best. And if that's seafood, that's great. If that's beef, that's fine. You need to make sure you're getting enough fat, though. Some meats are fattier or leaner than others. So just make sure you're getting enough fat. Again, you want 1 to 2 grams of fat to every 1 gram of protein. That's about the range that most people fall in, and then you adjust for your own body. I have videos on how to get started on a carnivore diet, so carnivore for beginners and fiber, constipation, and diet, and frequently asked questions. But in those first two, I explain how to figure out how much fat that you're getting. But you listen to your body, basically eat enough fat that you don't get constipated. So if you're eating chicken breasts are much more lean, so at least have them with the skin on. If you're going to buy them a whole chicken, then eat the whole thing. But if you are just buying parts, then you get the thighs or the drumsticks, the dark meat with the skin on, and perhaps cook them in butter or add grass-fed butter to that. But if you have specific medical conditions such as autoimmune issues, it's really important to stick to just red meat and water, just the ruminant animals such as cows, sheep, goats, venison, those sorts of yaks, if you can get it. So those sorts of ruminant animals filter out more of the plant toxins and other sorts of environmental toxins that get into the plants or on the plants, like glyphosate and things like that. Ruminant animals are thought to be able to filter out glyphosate, which is getting more and more prevalent in the environment. They're finding it in rainwater now, which is not good. So they filter out a lot more of these things. And so less of that's getting into the meat, so less that's getting into you. And so people with autoimmune issues do much, much better when they're sticking to just a red meat and water diet. But see what's best for you. Just try different things. If you think you're reacting to something, just cut it out. Just cut back down to beef and lamb and water, and then you'll add back in chicken, add back in eggs, things like that. And if after a month, and see if you react to that. If you don't, then great. And if you do, well then just stick to beef and lamb. That's pretty much it. Other than that, just eat the meat that you like and make sure you get enough fat.
Is carnivore safe for everyone?
In the sense that carnivore diet is our natural, biologically appropriate diet, then yes, optimal nutrition for humans is optimal for humans. People say, well, everybody is different. Everyone has a different diet and different dietary needs, and that's actually not quite true. We don't have different dietary demands, but we do have different sensitivity levels to inappropriate foods. So you might have less damage from lead exposure than I would, but that doesn't mean that lead is good for you. It just means it's less bad for you than it is for me. And the same is true of these different plant toxins. So different peoples, like from European descent and elsewhere, from the Mediterranean areas in particular, they have had exposure to agriculture longer, and so they have more defenses built up towards these plant toxins than, say, the Native Americans and Native Australians and other populations that only came to a more agriculturally based diet more recently. And so they would be better able to contend with a species inappropriate diet, but we all have the same requirements. We all need B12. We all need certain proteins and amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins and minerals. We all still need those. This is how we understand, well, these are essential vitamins and minerals, but they're not just essential for people from Asia or people from Turkey or something like that. They're essential for human beings. So even though every lion is a beautiful individual snowflake who have different blood types and different particular genetics, they all have an optimal diet. They're all carnivores. They're all supposed to eat meat. Same thing with koalas and elephants and cows. They all have a particular ability to detoxify plants in a certain way to get their required nutrients out of them. They can all do well on meat. Any animal can thrive on meat because there's nothing harmful in meat. And all meat has essential nutrients that are good for building and growing animals. You eat another animal and you turn that into your animal yourself. But only certain animals are able to do that to plants and turn plant tissue into animal tissue, which are two completely different forms of life. So if you are eating a plant, any animal can eat meat, but if you're eating a plant, you have to be specially designed and adapted to detoxify that plant and extract the requisite nutrients. And the entire plant kingdom and entire fungus kingdom does not have all the essential nutrients for human beings at all. It doesn't matter. You could eat every single plant that didn't kill you, and you still would not ever get enough essential nutrients from a natural diet. So you have to eat meat. It's essential. It's not dangerous. It's not damaging. There's nothing in there that's damaging. The only thing that they've been able to try to vilify from meat was saturated fat and cholesterol, and we've already discussed how that was made up. And so there isn't anything actually damaging in meat, but there are about 1 million different defense chemicals that the entire plant kingdom make, and they are most definitely harmful to you. So it is good for everyone because it's good for all animals and life on Earth, because all animals can eat other animals. Even herbivores opportunistically eat other animals when they can. And yes, it's good for them, and it's good for us too. And avoiding plants that can be toxic, even low-grade toxic to us, that is always beneficial as well. Yeah, so it is beneficial for everyone and is safe for everyone to do as well.
How do you get all the essential nutrients on the carnivore diet?
Just by eating meat. Meat has everything you need in the proportion that you need them. The RDAs, so the recommended daily allowances, this is what I said, well, you need this much of this and this much of this. Those were calculated at a time when everyone was eating a mixed diet, and you need a different constellation of nutrients and vitamins and minerals and everything else depending on what you're eating. So for instance, vitamin C is the classic one. I say, well, you're not going to get enough vitamin C. Well, first of all, there is vitamin C in meat, and there's actually more vitamin C in liver, cow liver, per gram than there is in apples. So there's actually plenty of vitamin C, but it so you get exactly as much as you need. But the thing is, what do we need vitamin C for? Well, in the context of scurvy, which is the known and named vitamin C deficiency, this is a misdevelopment of collagen, where proline and lysine are two amino acids, and they sort of form this spiral pattern, sort of two chains, and they'll make this spiral pattern around each other, and then they'll bond tightly to each other. Those two ropes of amino acids will bind very tightly to each other. It makes a very strong collagen. It's actually stronger than high tensile steel. It's like spider webs are made out of collagen. So it's very, very strong. And this is what your bones are made of. This is what a lot of tissue is made out of. And so if you get weak ones where they're not hydrolyzed, then they sort of push each other away, and so they're these, instead of being tightly bonded ropes, they're just sort of weak, frayed strings that are just barely hanging on to each other. And so you get very weak connective tissue, and your tissue can break down, and your capillaries and arteries and vessels can start breaking down. You start bleeding from your gums, start bleeding internally. You can have aortic dissections where the arteries will actually tear, and you'll start bleeding out in your body like strokes throughout your body. And this kills you. It's very dangerous. So obviously you need very good collagen. Okay, so vitamin C helps support, it's called catalyst. It catalyzes a reaction, which basically speeds up the reaction to hydrolyze proline and lysine. So you need to have those things hydrolyzed in order to make this tight, strong collagen. And you only need to do that if you don't already have proline and lysine that are already hydrolyzed. So if you have to do that yourself, then yeah, you need vitamin C to speed that reaction up. But if you're eating meat that contains collagen and has a lot of proline and lysine that's already hydrolyzed. So you actually skip that step. You miss that step. You don't need the vitamin C in order to make proper collagen. And so we have all the collagen that we need. So just like the Inuit, they don't eat a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables and things like that contain a lot of vitamin C, and they do fine. Same with the Maasai, etc. And so we've been eating meat. All the hard evidence shows that we've been eating meat for millions of years, and as apex predators, top of the food chain, for at least 2 million years. And so an apex predator is by definition a carnivore, because you're a predator and you're eating animals. And so during the ice ages, when we were in the Arctic circles, there were no plants available. We were only eating animals. And so if you couldn't get everything you needed from eating animals in the proportion that you needed it, we never would have survived in those circumstances. And in fact, our ancestors around that time when the ice ages started 2.5 million years ago, which forced Homo habilis, which was our ancestors at the time, to become apex predators. All the other animals that didn't become apex predators, that were early humans, they all died out. They're all the more plant-based ones. They couldn't survive because the plants all died out, and so they died out. So it was our ancestors that were able to figure out hunting as an apex predator and survive in those conditions were the ones that survived and then eventually evolved into us. So if they couldn't get everything they needed from meat, they wouldn't have made it. We wouldn't be here right now. And and again, you just need a different constellation and proportion of these nutrients depending on what you're eating. And so we haven't actually figured that out as far as it applies to carnivores not eating plants that have anti-nutrients. They can actually block out and bind to different vitamins and minerals and proteins and even fats and stop you from absorbing them in the first place. So you need a more abundant amount of these things to try to get them. For vitamin C example, taking that again, if you eat carbohydrates compete for binding sites in our gut for absorption. It's called the GLUT4 receptor. And so if you're eating carbohydrates, then that will block out and compete with the vitamin C. So it's said that you need 10 milligrams of vitamin C a day to not get scurvy. It's not that much. And you actually would get that from eating meat and certainly liver. But that's in the context of eating carbohydrates and blocking out all of this absorption. So if you're eating carbohydrates, you need vitamin C measured in milligrams. But if you're not eating carbohydrates, you only need vitamin C measured in nanograms. So that's 1/1,000,000th of a milligram. So it's very, very small amount. It's 1/1,000,000th of a gram. So it's a very, very tiny amount of vitamin C. You hardly need any. And again, you don't need it for scurvy and to make collagen. There's other things that your body uses it for, but you certainly don't need as much, and you especially don't need as much when you're not eating carbohydrates. But then if you look at the Maasai, who are carnivores, and they eat meat and drink blood, but they also drink a lot of milk. And it's actually higher fat milk. It's 8% milk fat instead of 3.5, 4% milk fat. And so they drink a lot of milk that has lactose in it. Lactose are carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates will block out the absorption of vitamin C, and yet they still don't get scurvy. They still don't get vitamin deficiencies. And that was actually studied multiple times over the last century, but in the 1920s and early 30s, the British actually did a massive study on them and their neighbors, the Akikuyu, who were largely plant-based. They found that the Akikuyu, who were plant-based, were very sick. They were underdeveloped. They were much shorter and weaker and lower lean body mass, and they had a lot of nutritional deficiencies as well. The Maasai did not have nutritional deficiencies. And so the plant-based population were nutritionally deficient, and the carnivores, even with milk and carbohydrates, were not nutritionally deficient and much healthier as a result as well. So yes, you get everything you need from meat. You just eat meat, eat fatty meat. Fat is an essential nutrient as well. It's not just a calorie source. So people say, well, if you're losing weight, you're losing fat. We have plenty of fat, so you don't eat fat. That's not what that's for. Fat is an essential nutrient. It's not just a calorie source. There are essential fatty acids that you have to have or you can get sick and die. They're essential fat-soluble nutrients that you have to have or you get sick and die. So you need to eat the fat, you need to eat the protein as well, so you get the lean with the fat, and that's complete whole nutrition for human beings, and those vitamins and minerals come with that. Also, you want the majority of your calories to come from fat, because if you get the majority of your calories from protein, that actually can cause a problem called protein poisoning or rabbit starvation. You need the fat, and you need a large proportion of fat. And so even if you were getting some of your calories from carbohydrates, that would still keep that proportion of calories from protein down. You want your protein and your amino acids to go to building your body, and you want the fat and other sources to go towards making energy. And that's the way you do it. So it's an essential nutrient, and you get it from eating meat.
Are there any side effects from being on the carnivore diet?
Just being, besides like losing fat, gaining health, and being awesome. Not much. That's pretty much the side effects are just being healthy. You know, it's not something that is going to cause disease or harm in some people. Now, your cholesterol might change, your LDL might go up, your uric acid might go up, and people look at that and go, oh goodness, that's a problem, but it's actually not. And so your body's actually normalizing. When you're keto adapting and adapting to using fat, your uric acid levels can go up a bit, and that can scare people because they say that that's going to cause gout, but actually there's a very poor correlation between uric acid in your blood and getting gout. And so when you're going on a ketogenic diet and your ketones go up because you're making ketones, which are basically your fat energy as opposed to glucose, which is your carb energy, and you make both. But when your ketones go up, that competes for elimination in your kidneys, peeing it out with uric acid. And so if you have too many ketones because your body's not using them properly, it takes months before your body starts really using ketones as well as it can, even though you're going to feel better fairly soon. You'll keep getting better month after month after month. And you see the uric acid level go up, but then slowly come down as you're getting more and more keto adapted. And so that can scare people. People's LDL could potentially go up, but their HDL goes up and their triglycerides come down and they gain health. And again, cholesterol does not cause heart disease at any level. It was never the cause. It's never going to be the cause. Well, what if it gets really high? Well, anything can be too high, but it's not going to cause heart disease at any level because it doesn't cause heart disease. So these sorts of things are some things that can change in ways that may worry us, but but those are understandable in the circumstances if you understand what's going on physiologically. And so you really don't get deleterious side effects from going on a carnivore diet. You just improve your health. And like sometimes if people aren't eating enough fat, or they're not drinking enough water, or they're not eating enough in general, they can have issues that can be looked at. And then this is why a lot of coaching programs or Facebook groups where people have gone through this before. Say, oh, look, I went through that. This is what you need to do. Maybe you're losing too many electrolytes. Maybe you're not drinking enough water, all these other sorts of things. That's just, understanding how your body works and how to properly nourish it. But once you do that, if you're just doing everything properly, then you're not going to get any bad side effects from that.
How do you start the carnivore diet?
Well, the best thing to do is just get going on it. You start focusing on meat, focusing on fat, not being worried about the fat, and you try to cut out all the other things. So it's just as important what not to eat as what to eat. You're eating the fatty meat that gives us all the nutrients that we need, and that's very important. But the other things cause harm. And so my hard rule for myself, and what I recommend to people who are trying to do this optimally, is no plants or mushrooms, no sugar or any sweeteners, and nothing artificial. And that will go for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. And so you just try to cut all that stuff out. That looks different for different people. If you're living on your own and you're just like, great, I'm going to get into this, you just throw out all that other stuff, because if you're trying to quit smoking, the last thing you want to do is leave packs of cigarettes around the house. And if you're in a household where they're probably not on board and they're like, look, you do your crazy thing, but we're gonna keep eating everything else, well, then you need to just be a bit more mindful, because you might get cravings and you might succumb to that. But that's okay. People mess up, they slip up. Just get right back on the bandwagon as soon as you can. If you're getting cravings, you just eat more fatty meat. Think of that as a hunger signal. In the first 2 weeks is when you'll have the most carb cravings and sugar cravings, especially alcohol if you drink alcohol. And after that, you pretty much don't miss it. And so if you eat enough fatty meat until it stops tasting good, typically your cravings will be pretty low. And if you do get cravings, think about it as I'm not eating enough, I need to go and eat more. And after that, it should sort itself out. I've got a lot of videos on my YouTube channel. It's just Anthony Chaffee MD is my YouTube channel, and I have a whole playlist called Getting Started on a Carnivore Diet, and there are videos on how to start that. So carnivore for beginners, fiber, constipation, and diet, frequently asked questions. Those are ones on how to do it and some troubleshooting early on. And then there are ones on why to do it, why it matters, why it makes a difference. Those are, I think, the most important, because that tells you why you're doing this. And if you understand how much of a difference this makes and why it's important that you eat this way and why it's important to not eat plants specifically, you're much more likely to stick with it. You can also join different groups and communities that can also help you stick with it, especially in the early phases. So different free groups on Facebook, like Zeroing In on Health and Zero Carb Health. Those are excellent Facebook groups. They stay very strict, and so they ask you to do the same, and you do whatever you want, but when you talk about things, you talk about it in that strict fashion. And so you can get a lot of help from people that have done it in a strict way and had the most benefits from it. If you're able to sort of self-start and do it that way, then that's great. I think that, just jumping in head first is probably the way to do it. If you can't quite do that, you need to have a structured plan on when you're going to drop certain things. So you drop carb, sugar, and alcohol day one. Then next week you drop nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, grains, things like that. The next week you drop nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. The next week you drop greens, and so on. And then on this date, you mark it on the calendar. On this date, I'm dropping this. On this, and it's a week at a time. Don't give yourself more than that. And then after a month or so, you say on this date, it's nothing but meat and water. And so you can do it that way, or you can just jump right in. But at some point, you just have to stop. And so you need to mark that on the calendar when that's going to be, or else it's never going to happen. And so sometimes people can do that on their own, and that's great. I highly encourage people to do that if they can, so that they don't have to pay money or anything like that, because I don't want people to have to pay money just to be healthy, because that's everybody's birthright, is to be healthy. If you do need a bit more structured approach to it, you need some more of watch these videos in this order and read these sort of blogs and these sort of sections, and have more people that can help out, and have weekly Zoom calls where you can ask questions live and look at other people's questions and get more help and support. You can join the different carnivore coaching communities. I have one just called How to Carnivore. So you can go to howtocarnivore.com, and people can sign up there and get more structured approach to it. But most, if not all, of those resources are available on YouTube, but you just have to sort of find them yourself. But you can start with that playlist on my YouTube channel, Getting Started on a Carnivore Diet.
Thank you to everyone for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. If you want to see more content, please head over to my YouTube channel, leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks.